I will be your host today. So unlike a traditional lecture where the speaker presents information and the audience simply listens, Disciplined Agile talks is designed to be a more dynamic and engaging experience. So I hope you will be able to feel it. And I would like to encourage all of you to actively participate in our discussion with our esteemed speaker, Joshua Barnes. And it will be also a great opportunity to learn from someone who has really valuable insights and experience to share. However, before we start, let me show you some technicalities. Oh, sorry, here is a spoiler ahead. my bad. Okay, so the first thing, the event is being recorded. However, I also treat it as an opportunity for you. If you don't follow our social media yet, please do it, because not only will you learn many interesting facts about the world of the Disciplined Agile, you will also be able to get the recording once it will be available. So it's the important thing. Another thing is, for those of you who collect PDU points, so professional development units, please make sure that you don't forget to change your Zoom name or your nickname on the Zoom to your real name and surname. To identify your real name, and based on that, we'll be able to grant you the PDU points. Okay, let's move on. We prepared an exciting agenda planned for you, and firstly, we'll give you an overview of the Project Management Institute. So generally, we'll shortly introduce the PMI, but also the Disciplined Agile community to provide some further context and the background for today's discussion. And following this, our guest, Joshua Barnes, will present on the topic of how can a Scrum team use Disciplined Agile. So it will be the main part of today's webinar. And it will be a great chance to learn about the practical aspect of the Disciplined Agile implementation in your daily endeavors. So this is what we are here for, to learn about this practical aspect. And right after the presentation, there will be a QA session. So if you would like to ask Joshua any questions, please just don't hesitate. You can leave them in the chat, and we'll definitely get back to them. So the last sentence, the last thing from my end would be, please sit back, relax, and get ready for an hopefully insightful and engaging discussion.
Thanks, Agnieszka. Just like a contract in a team, a contract for a webinar is also crucial to establish a clear meetings rules. So as you mentioned, let us begin with a brief introduction. So who are we? PMI Poland chapter is part of PMI Global and has been operating in Poland for 20 years. I think it's 20 or 21. PMI Global, as a leading international non-profit organization, has a presence all around the world, and I think it's really impressive. I think there are more than 300 branches. Based on our experience, we can confidently affirm that PMI is an incredible community and platform for product and project management professionals. It allows us to connect, to network, and enhance our knowledge and skills in organizing the product and project life cycles. PMI chapters provide also a wide range of services and activities for volunteers and members, including open meetings such as the one we are hosting today. And this event wouldn't have been possible without PMI's approach to addressing the agile domain, which has become an integral part of modern project management practices. And over 3 years ago, a group of colleagues and I began exploring PMI's evolution in the context of Agile and Disciplined Agile. Intrigued by this, we decided to establish a team in Poland and a community, and I feel we have quite a nice success. Our primary objective is launch programs in Poland that increase awareness and proficiency in disciplined agile approach. In addition, of course, to foster the DA mindset and build a comprehensive knowledge base on our social media platforms. However, our aspirations beyond the Polish market, which is why we organize open events like the one we are all attending today. So I'm sure you are eager to hear from our guest speaker. So Agnieszka, I think this is the perfect moment to introduce our guest to the participants.
Okay, thank you, Kasia. So let me shortly introduce our special guest. Joshua Barnes is the founder and president of Process Mentors Incorporated, specializing in PMI authorized training and consulting. He's also the co-founder of Success Mentors University, a platform for disciplined agile and project management certifications, as well as success engineering workshops. With over 2 decades of experience, Joshua has led diverse engagements, driving culture changes, productivity, and quality improvements. He's a tough leader in agile and lean methodologies with a focus on disciplined agile and value stream management. Joshua is an international speaker, a LinkedIn learning author, and live stream host. He has trained and coached thousands of people, from team members to executive leadership. So, Joshua, we are really glad that you managed to join us tonight.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Hi.
Thank you.
We hope you're having a great time and that you're full of energy, and eager to answer some interesting questions.
Always. Yeah.
Always. So once again, we warmly welcome you. Joshua, forgive me, really, I'm very curious about something. I would love to ask you about 2 things before we start.
Sure.
I hope it will be fine for you.
Sure.
Joshua, could you please share us the journey that led Disciplined Agile to become not just your daily business, but also your passion? What's the story behind your dedication? I'm asking what fuels your why.
Sure. Yeah. So, DA was born outside of IBM back in 2012, and the 2 co-creators, Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons, and I, we've worked together for the past 20 plus years. So we had done a lot of work in some of the things that made it into Disciplined Agile, and then once DA was released, we've been doing consulting work on it ever since. We worked quite heavily with partnering on engagements with Mark and Scott's company prior to PMI's acquisition. So from sort of the beginning origins of what really got formed into DA, and then what we now know is a really great curated knowledge base plus all of the additional guidance, is why we have so much of a focus with value delivery to our customers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, actually, I also would have one question to you. I hope that you're not afraid of a little bit of controversy, because mine might be quite picky here. Okay, so the journey of Disciplined Agile has been marked with some ups and downs, both before its integration from IBM into PMI and in its current phase. So it represents somehow a continuous evolution of this approach. And what insights could you share with us regarding the future of DA within PMI? Because it is said, let me comment it in this way, that it might be mentioned as a rumor, whether it is still worthwhile to keep an eye on this area.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say it definitely is. Yes, there has been lots of ups and downs. There's been misconceptions, and there has been just a lot of challenge with being able to paint the picture of the value that DA can offer. One of the things from a direction standpoint is 2 points that I'll make, and I have to be a little careful. So I do consult with PMI, and I do work on the Disciplined Agile IP team. So I'm going to be very careful with sort of how much I can share from an insight perspective. But 2 of the really important things that I would say to keep in your minds, and why it's so important to keep abreast of what is going on with DA, is that there are some new workshops that are coming out. So these are different than the existing certification courses. The first one, which is still in beta, is focused on teams. It's focused on a starting point that my presentation is actually tied into, which is if you're a team that is using a prescriptive framework like Scrum, how can you identify some of the areas that you could improve? You've got that bit of friction or drag, the challenges that you come across, and where do you go to find some of the possible options from a practice, from a technique or strategy perspective? And that's all part of the Disciplined Agile browser, right? Which is the browser's the name of it, but it's really a curated database, and probably the most significant one that's freely available, right, to anyone of Agile and Lean practices. So it's the direction of these new workshops, which again, a team focus versus more of an individual certification focus. I mean, they both have their place, they both have their value, but that is some of where DA is starting to go back to a bit of its roots, which is more of focusing on organizational agility and helping organizations get there.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. We certainly have many more questions, but unfortunately, time does not permit us to ask them all. So I will now hand over to you. So the stage is yours.
Okay, fantastic. So let me go ahead and share my screen. You might need to give me permission to share.
Yeah, we'll do it right now because I also see this issue. Just a second. Okay, now you should have this permission.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right. So I will ask, are you able to see
Yeah,
my
we
screen?
can see your screen perfectly
Oh.
fine.
All right, fantastic. Let me go ahead and so what I'm not doing is I'm not going to be using PowerPoint. I'm going to be doing more of my content in Miro. So the content I've got is about 40 to 45 minutes from a duration standpoint. We get towards the end. You know, the thing on this is my QR code. I'd love to be able to connect with any of you on LinkedIn that I'm not already connected with. So the first thing that I want to address, and this goes to some of the misconceptions, some of the confusion on Disciplined Agile, is what problem does DA solve for Scrum teams, right? And the thing that is for me has always been, in no disrespect to Scrum, the company I work for, we've done a fair amount over the years of helping teams and helping organizations get value out of using Scrum. I mean, Scrum is a very prevalent approach, very popular, and has been for quite some time. But one of the challenges is that you have a relatively small body of knowledge, and it is a prescriptive framework that is not fit for all purposes, or not fit for all purposes in exactly the same way. So just think for a minute, as far as the organizations you work at, or if you're consultants, you know, the organizations that you help support. And a team that's doing enhancement work, new capabilities, right, feature type requirements, something that's more akin to, you know, the timeline of a project, is very different from what teams that are just doing maintenance work, right? The frequency of delivery, maintenance teams are typically doing very frequent releases. They're doing things that are more akin to fixing or, you know, small quality issues versus things that might have a pretty significant impact and take a fair amount of time from an enhancement perspective. But in addition to that, we have teams that do content management work or things like marketing or vendor management, you know, innovation and services teams. And so if you're trying to use a one-size-fits-all type of approach, you're going to need to do some tailoring, right? One of the 12 principles out of the, you know, PMBOK version 7, right? Tailoring, right? And so that's the big thing, is where do you go to get the content you'd be tailoring, and what are you trying to solve for? So, well, one of it is doing things that don't add value. And what happens if you've gotten to a point where you've used a particular approach, and again, something like Scrum, since that's what this topic focuses on, and you're not needing to invest a whole lot of time to do sprint planning, right? You're doing maybe similar sized items. The team's got a fair level of proficiency with that way of working. Maybe you're ready to move to something that is more of a flow-based approach, a Kanban-based approach, right? So you're doing things that don't add value. How about a framework that conflicts with your company culture? Frustration trying to apply an approach that's ill-suited for the type of work that you do. Some of the things we see delays in the value that the team or the value that a value stream is able to actually get into their hands of their customers. Double set of books, right? We're going to figure out how best to get our work done, but then there's sort of this overhead stuff that we have to do. And then seeking out practices to help us either remove or reduce some of the things that are hurting us. So these are just some of the challenges when we adhere pretty strictly to a prescriptive approach. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is to stop trying to force fit and start looking at what you can do to take the really good things, the things that are helpful, but then build upon those. So this is a challenge. This is one of the things that, we do a lot of the certification training and a lot of the beginning of the journey, the Disciplined Agile Scrum Master training. And what we try to paint the picture of is that DA is still a square peg going into a round hole, right? That's all about choosing your way of working or tailoring or taking your existing square peg, again, a different approach outside of DA, and doing this, right? What we're trying to do is we're trying to ensure that we have a fit for purpose way of working and one that we can continue to improve upon. And that's how we see teams being efficient. We see teams members being happy. But the other thing that we absolutely have to bring balance to is we can't take a siloed approach to making improvements, right? To really get that round peg, what we need to do is we need to be meeting our organizational needs. So we still have governance and we still have risk or compliance, again, depending on the industry that we're in, depending on the value stream that we're in or the product or service that we are responsible for enhancing or maintaining. We also have to be aware we're interacting with other teams. In the complexity of digital products these days, it's pretty rare that a single product from an enhancement perspective is not going to potentially need an enhancement, even if it's rather small, in one or more other products, just because of the way things are integrated these days, and have been for quite some time. So we need to strike this balance between maybe filling some of the gaps and filling some of the process-related things that us as a Scrum team could make an improvement with other aspects within the organization. So this is one of the things that really the talk that I got today focuses on. It's like being able to say to people, do you know that Disciplined Agile has a great knowledge base? That's like this big giant toolbox, right? It's like telling somebody a little bit of a secret because DA is still not very well known, right? I mean, there are again, as we started off in one of the questions, as far as is DA still relevant? Is PMI still investing in DA? Should we still even be paying attention to what it is? Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we take a look at the tools that we have available, our Agile toolbox, right? I mean, we've got, on one hand, a set of tools that looks like this. And if you're, maybe you live in an apartment or a condominium, something that you really don't have a lot of maintenance that you need to do, something like this might be quite sufficient. But if we were going in to have a vehicle, a car serviced, right, or repaired, I'd be concerned if I saw that this was the toolbox the mechanic had. I mean, I'm going to expect something like this. Now, I wouldn't think that they're going to use every single tool in such a sizable toolbox, but I'd have some comfort to know, okay, they have a lot of tools, and depending on what unfolds as they get into doing the maintenance, doing the improvement, right, fixing something that might be broke, I'm gonna feel a lot more comfortable there. So what we see sometimes is the situation of if the only tool you have is a hammer, Well, it's great if you actually have nails, but if you when everything starts to look like a nail, because you don't have a lot of different options and you don't know potentially where you can find options and find options that are going to work pretty well together, we run into this situation. So, and again, no disrespect to Scrum, it's a small set of tools, right? I mean, the Scrum Guide is a small body of knowledge, and I feel that, at least in my experience, it's one of the things that has made Scrum stay so prevalent. The Scrum Guide is very mature. It doesn't get updated all that frequently, and when it does, it's more of a small evolutionary type update. But it's small in comparison to something like the curated knowledge base we have with DA, which is kind of the other end of the spectrum. It's got almost 2,000 practices and techniques that we can choose from, right? I mean, it's not like we'd expect somebody to use all of those just like the mechanic using the big toolbox here. It's not like we're just going to dump the toolbox over and it's like you got to use every single one of these tools. But we do want to see that teams have tools that are going to support their type of work. So if we have teams that are using Scrum and they're working with more legacy technology, we've got approaches and techniques that we can choose from to support that. Very similarly, if we've got a brand new tech stack, right, we want to know that the practices and strategies and techniques that we have at our disposal are going to provide us an opportunity to have a way of working that again meets our needs. So we have lots of different types of work, right? I mean, we've got, again, kind of the maintenance work or something that, is just like jump starting a car. I mean, it's pretty simple. Something a little more challenging, we get into something like electrical stuff. That's a whole lot of challenge and complexity there. Maybe we need to re-platform. We have old technology. It's kind of beat up. It's very expensive to make any changes, right? We need to re-platform. And the other thing is, what about the unexpected events? What do we do from a team perspective where, this last picture is, well, this team, it might just be something as simple as putting a new radiator cap and filling the radiator back up with water and coolant. It could be something more significant, a level of complexity and work like replacing the whole engine. Right? So we benefit from having a nice body of knowledge. So let's just take a quick look at this, at the Scrum Guide, right? It's 13 pages of content, 3 roles, 5 events, and 3 artifacts. And the question is this enough? And this is a discussion on a lot of the engagements we do with organizations that are using Scrum and, and talking with Scrum Masters. Is this enough for all of the types of work that the teams are doing within the organization? Here's where we're in the very beginning, right? We're in Scrum definition. This is like page 3, right? And the underlying part there is the Scrum framework is purposely incomplete, only defining the parts required to implement Scrum theory. Yeah, so I mean, the Scrum Guide and the guidance we have from Scrum, right, provides what we need to start utilizing a time-boxed approach, right, using sprints and using what Scrum has defined as this framework. But it is also very clear, and unfortunately, this doesn't get addressed and attended to nearly as much as it should. What do you do to fill those other incomplete parts? That's how a guide can be this size versus, again, if we were to print the guidance that's in Disciplined Agile, well, it would exceed, a few thousand pages at least. Never attempted to do that, but I would just say from what we know in the DA browser and what we have in the DA microsite, thousands of pages in comparison. So where do you find content to be able to support what's potentially missing for your team and for how your team works with other teams? And they all might be using slightly different ways of working. If we have a team that's using Scrum quite effectively, they might also be regularly managing dependencies and working with people that are in a more hybrid situation. Some might still be using a more traditional or predictive approach. And then we have lots of people that are in the organization in those shared services areas that oftentimes also are having to attend to working with teams using quite different approaches. Well, we can take a look at our Scrum Master, right? So get support from the Scrum Master. So a professional Scrum Master, and this is kind of where I see where this fits, right? So somebody that has got experience from being on a Scrum team and then grew into the Scrum Master role, right? So we want somebody with experience using this approach before they start coaching other people dedicated to the team, right? So I mean, Scrum has a dedicated role as part of the Scrum team as the Scrum Master. They know how to facilitate filling the gaps in the Scrum Guide, which are intentionally incomplete. Yeah, that's a big part of what a Scrum Master needs to be able to do. They're on a continuous learning journey. That's how they know how to fill gaps, and they know how to work with the teams that they're getting to get the value out of Scrum, and trained and mentored to be a Scrum Master. So this is more of an ideal situation. I have worked with teams that have very competent, very professional Scrum Masters. But that's not the majority of the situation. The majority is we do see some challenges. Could have a very experienced, very competent person in a Scrum Master role, but they're not dedicated to the team. They've got 2 teams, 3 teams. Sometimes it'll be multiple teams that an organization has them assigned to. Sometimes we see that the Scrum Guide is the guide. There is very little reluctance to doing anything different. So they lack a breadth of experience to draw upon to solve problems. A team member that also took on the role of Scrum Master. So sometimes we see somebody on the team, might be an analyst, might be a developer, might be somebody from a QA perspective if we're talking about software, a digital product that we're enhancing or maintaining. And so yeah, we've got somebody who's just kind of stepped into that role. I mean, they're maybe doing the best they can, but they're also still writing code and trying to be a Scrum Master at the same time. Maybe they're inflexible to other approaches. And maybe they became a Scrum Master without ever even being a team member, right? They've gone through some form of training, maybe a 2-day course and got a certification, and next thing you know, they're actually in a coaching position, teaching people something that they might themselves have had very little experience with. So if you are in a situation as a Scrum team and your Scrum Master doesn't have a vast amount of experience with lots of different Agile ways of working, lots of different practices and techniques to be able to give some indication of what might work well, some of the pros and cons of each, well, one of the things we can do is they can use Google, right? Agile practices. And yeah, that's one of the things we see. As a matter of fact, I think in a lot of ways, Google is one of the sort of bigger competitors to DA because people go to Google. But the problem is do you know what the results are providing? Are these paid results? Are they just results that have a lot of SEO information and so they're kind of up higher in the results? But maybe it's not a really good, credible piece of guidance that you're finding. Maybe it's just something that a lot of people have come across. The other thing is when you're Googling and finding, or searching, and you're finding practices on a practice-by-practice perspective, you really don't know if you're going to be able to aggregate those together within your way of working or again, evolving your existing way of working such as Scrum, and it's going to work really well for you. You can watch YouTube videos. Yeah, I mean, there's some really great content on YouTube. But again, there's some really great content and there's some not so great content. You can phone a friend, right? So you're on a Scrum team and you're calling your friend that's at another organization and said, hey, you guys adopted Scrum, long before we did. What can you tell me? What can I kind of copy and paste into our own thing? But again, you had a different team, you might have different work, different technical or business domain complexity, lots of different variables from one team to the next. And you can read a lot of books. Now those, I see a lot of books in this picture. Those are all really great books. But they all, other than the DA books at the very bottom, I see some Choose Your Wow and the original Disciplined Agile delivery book. I see the executive guide in there as well. Right, so there's lots of good information in books, but again, it's a little bit like what you might find with Google. It's like things that are very good from a point perspective, but not necessarily going going to give you how they might interact with one practice compared to a next. So the point is that one of the things that we're trying to raise more awareness on, and there is a new Disciplined Agile workshop specifically for teams. Now, that's not a certification course. It is a new workshop that is designed to take teams that are using other approaches like Scrum and teach them the value of how they can use this big database, this big knowledge base with all this type of content in it, right? This was when we first saw essentially the rationally unified process become Disciplined Agile out of IBM back in 2012, right? So there's a lot of unified process content that is part of the knowledge base of DA, but there is content from a Scrum perspective and the scaled perspective, right? There are things that are coming out of Agile data and Agile modeling and Kanban, and there's good information from a DevOps perspective. We've got some really fantastic value stream management content that is now within the value stream layer of the browser, as well as things that are tied now into the PMBOK guide. So that's one of the biggest differentiators in what DA has in comparison to most, if not all, the other approaches, is that it's got the DA browser and it's got this great knowledge base. And for those of you that haven't had an opportunity to see it, well, here it is. So we have left-hand navigation, right? So this on the left-hand side, we've got content that is arranged by the phases of DA, right? So underneath inception, the stuff from a project perspective we'd be doing initially, right? Things like planning the release and doing some work in the requirements base, identifying risk, the stuff that we need to do to make sure that as we get into the construction phase, right, we're on a solid approach, a solid plan to be able to execute what we've got in scope. And then we get into transition. Now, the one thing is we're just looking at the picture. I'll do a quick demo of this in just a moment, is that we have something called the ongoing phase. And just the way that it's arranged in the knowledge base, it's underneath transition. There's another area that gets to be a bit confusing for people, is that, we go through transition, we deploy the solution, and then we're going to get into like address risk and coordinate activities and govern the team and measure outcomes and so forth. This is just the way the navigation is laid out. There are a lot of things that we'd be doing in this ongoing area of the knowledge base before we initiate a new quantity of work or as we're starting to improve an existing way of working. And then we have DevOps and enterprise and value stream. So a few other things about the browser is, the center section, that's a process goal diagram. It's just a container of information. If we need to think about how we're forming a team, and let's face it, if we're using Scrum, we probably have a pretty well-formed team. If we're not, or we are doing sort of a Scrum-based approach that's more hybrid, we might be functioning where we're not really a team. We're doing still, certain quantities of work, maybe in their beginning to end state and kind of then moving things along. Well, we could go to the form team process goal and take a look at some of the options that we have here. The lower part, the context box, if we click on something in the process goal diagram, it displays content at the bottom. The sort of separator that we see, the see also and additional resources, there's information that gives us more of a deep dive into a lot of the content, a lot of the options that we have within this knowledge base. Some of those are going to be in the PMI ecosystem. It's going to be in the Disciplined Agile microsite on PMI.org, but it could be within, projectmanagement.com. It could be in lots of the other sources of content that PMI have. But it can also be curated, vetted links to good quality industry recognized content. And I'll show that as I get into the browser in just a moment. We can search, we can export graphics, and you'll see as I get into the browser, we can also translate into other languages. So I'm going to stop my presentation mode for just a minute and bring a browser over. Let me get this just a little bit bigger, and I'm going to just I'll make this pretty big just so that we can see it pretty well. So this this knowledge base and where I'm at is I'm in Disciplined Agile delivery, which is really focused more at the team level. So working with a Scrum team, this is a definite focal point. And underneath the Disciplined Agile delivery portion, which has got, the inception, construction, transition phase, and ongoing, right? There's around 1,600 practices and techniques that are contained just within this area. So there's a lot of proven content in here. That's another thing that is a really good sort of selling point in working with teams using Scrum is PMI, right, has curated all of this. So it's not something that is just an open source version where we've got, people that are just putting stuff in and maybe it's good, maybe it's not. These are all things that have been proven practices and techniques to work. And that also helps quite a bit. So I'm just gonna click on, I'll click on Explore Scope because I'm gonna get into this a little bit more in just a moment. So if I were to go to something like User Story, and you can see I have gone from the Explore Scope process goal. These items here are called decision points, how we're gonna explore purpose, explore usage, explore the domain. And then what we have at the far right, and this kind of looks like a mind map because that's where this all started, is we have all of the options that are associated with this. So when I click on User Story, and this is a split screen, I can just bring this up a little bit. Let me try and get all this on the screen as I'm trying to present it as large as possible. You can see, we have a brief description, right, what a user story is. We've got some bullet points. Now, sometimes these are more robust versus less robust, depending on the practice option. But what I wanted to show here is that if I click on additional resources, right, we're going to find some really good links. I could go to User Stories Applied for Software Development. It's going to take me to an author named Mike Cohen, and it's at Mountain Goat Software. And he's probably trained more people on Scrum than anybody else in the world. And he's also written an excellent book on user stories. So there's a really great just melding of content that's within this knowledge base for everybody to use, definitely for teams that are using an approach like Scrum. So let's take a look at how Scrum teams, let me get back here and get back into presentation mode. All right, so how would a Scrum team use this? Well, and there's lots of ways, right? Here's a Scrum team, they get it, right? It's like, hey, look at this thing. Right? Somebody told me about this and it's pretty great. It's like, why didn't somebody tell me this before? So there's a lot of potential challenges, impediments that teams come across, and Scrum or teams using Scrum is no different. And I'm gonna bring in one that is by a gentleman named Tom Guild. Now, most people don't know who Tom is. Tom wrote a book back in 1968 that was the beginning origins of what we now know as Agile. He's had one of the most persistent, one of the most long-lasting careers. Tom's in his 80s at this point, still writing books, still very much in tune with Agile ways of working. And I had an opportunity to spend some time in a discussion with Tom, and I said, hey, you've got a longer span of experience than almost anybody else I could be having a conversation like this with. So from a way of working perspective, what is one of the most systemic challenges? And he says, the largest problem with delivering software is and always has been with requirements. Yeah, sure, we can, requirements, missed expectations, just communicating with people, right? Customers or our business stakeholders that are communicating with our product owner on our Scrum team can be a challenge, right? Even in the best of situations, right? The product owner being responsible for the product backlog, and again, having any level of delegation or assistance, whether it's from somebody in the business or again, somebody as a development team member on our Scrum team that has an analyst skills, working with them to help with requirements, right? We can still see lots of challenges there. So this is actually part of the new DA for Teams workshop. And so here's an example from a Scrum team that I worked with. Right? So the question to them is, okay, you're using Scrum. What are the requirements practices that you're using? Right? So they spent, a few minutes, a little bit of time, and it's like, yeah, well, we have a backlog with user stories. And we do consider our stories that are larger epics. And they had some traditional requirements docs. They still had some pretty detailed specifications from the way that they described it. They had something, an opportunity doc that was really also kind of an opportunity doc and a combination between their business case. Right? So how the decision for that project, the quantity of work that they would be doing, right, got approved and it got funded and all of that. So the next thing is saying, okay, so you're using this. What are your problems? What are some of the challenges you've got? You see, there's, which is always the case, a bit more verboseness in the writing. So frequent lack of content, lots of interpretation that goes on. Yeah, yep. We don't capture our design work and end up with giant tasks, and the user story is way bigger than we size. Interactions with the product owner often comes with a solution, not a good description of what they really need. So, sometimes there's, design or implementation details that have already been discussed prior to the team members that actually have the expertise to be able to do that. Product owner has other responsibilities, and we wait a lot, and so on, right? So, I mean, there's the situation where we've got a lot of challenges. And so what does the Scrum team do? Again, do they just hit up Google? Their Scrum Master in this particular case was somebody that was a team member that just was trying to kind of grow into the role. So they weren't really a professional Scrum Master, right? They weren't doing that more of a dedicated role or even almost like a title position. So here's what we do, right? And I was just on this process goal diagram, and what we want to ask, I'll be the team spokesperson here, and the first thing we do is just drag these, like, so what are the things you're doing? Well, we could say, yeah, we're using a user story, and just I'm going to duplicate that one. I'm going to come up here, and they were using Epic, right? And they had a backlog. Let me see backlog. Where's backlog? Backlog's down here, right? It was, Agile backlog. Right? But they've got some challenges. They've got some things that are around identifying some of the work that's needed either for the first or maybe a series of user stories. And so, I'm going to just stop presenting for a minute. So I'm going to bring the browser back over, right? We might say, well, let's just look at, is there anything here as we're going through to kind of help? Well, hey, I got some quality requirements. Quality requirements typically are non-functional type of stuff, and we've got technical stories, right? Simple strategy for capturing quality requirements, works well when a quality requirement is straightforward, right? So we've got some information here. We also have something called the explicit list, right? So this is a way that we can package up some of the non-functional requirements, some of the things that we might see one or more stories triggering or invoking, like business rules. I'll click on business rule, right? And I asked them, well, how are you capturing things like data requirements and business rules? And it kind of varied. And I'll say that is sometimes consistent with teams that I work with that are using Scrum. So what do? Well, we start to identify some of these areas, right, that they can start using and putting into practice to see if it'll start solving some of those problems. So I could say, technical story, and I could say explicit list, and it sounds like we probably need to have a little bit better acceptance criteria because there was a lot of vagueness that they communicated in a lot of the stories. So there's, you get that vagueness, and you're either going to try to go through something like sprint planning. You hope that your backlog is well groomed. The team members have had at least some opportunity to see what's been prioritized or ordered at the top of the backlog. They might have something like a definition of ready, right? Something that clearly defines, like, this is kind of what we need to make sure that if we are pulling a story off of the backlog and putting it into our sprint backlog, right? We're committing to doing it in that sprint. There's a high probability we understand what the ask is and how we're going to be able to do that work and how it's going to be, accepted, right? The validation. So that's what we do here, right? Is we teach Scrum teams how to use the DA knowledge base to identify options that they can see if it'll solve some of those problems, right? And there's lots of things here, right? And some of the things with that particular team, there was not always a really good understanding of their users, right? I mean, so we talked about creating some personas. So that's one of the biggest aha moments that I typically have as I'm engaged to work with, a team that's using Scrum. And I'm showing them, like, you can keep using the time box based approach. Maybe we can take a look at the Agile lifecycle in DA. We can kind of take a look at, if you've ever heard of Sprint Zero, it's the inception phase is a lot like that. Maybe we would benefit from doing a little bit of upfront work, right? Again, hopefully we're not going to need a whole bunch of time to do that. But even if we're not looking at the DA life cycles, the phases and the lightweight milestones, we're able to show them this knowledge base and start showing some of these practices that maybe they haven't heard of, maybe they've heard of, but the way that they thought that it was going to be put into practice or thought that it was going to be something that they'd be doing was quite different. And it really starts to, again, open people's eyes to the benefit of Disciplined Agile. So I'm going to stay out of presentation mode just so I can kind of zoom in. So this is not all by any means. Some of the areas that teams using Scrum can have some challenges with. Things like, is scope being managed? Is risk being managed? Right? I've had a lot of Scrum masters tell me, well, we don't treat risk directly. I mean, risk is really dealt with as a byproduct of the product owner prioritizing the stories in the backlog, or the product backlog items, if we were using the Scrum Guide terminology. Yeah, sometimes that's not going to be good enough, and oftentimes it's not. Like, we need to understand how scope is managed, how risk is managed, how dependencies are managed. Right? We oftentimes don't have a Scrum team that's doing work that is something they can completely do in sort of isolation from beginning to end, get it into release management, and out into the hands of customers and get value from it. There's oftentimes lots of dependencies and coordination that has to happen. Stories are ready to be implemented. Team has working agreements. Workflow is visualized. Yes, this is so beneficial. I'm just kind of scrolling. I won't read all of these, but this is, again, part of the new DA for Teams workshop. And what we do is something like carryover work. So I don't know how many of you out there have either been on a Scrum team or coached or worked with a Scrum team, but oftentimes there's carryover work. Now, if we're doing things very early in our project life cycle, if we're doing the equivalent of a project, right, something that is more sizable in scope, well, we oftentimes might see that there's carryover work because if we're using a risk value approach to the prioritization of the work and the planning of what we need to get done. Sure, I mean, we're doing the hard stuff. That oftentimes is going to present some uncertainties. But outside of something like that, a lot of times there's carryover work. So is there one thing that we could identify that causes Scrum teams to have uncompleted work during a sprint that gets carried over? Now, I ask that question to Scrum teams and specifically Scrum Masters a lot. And a lot of what I hear is impediments. Yeah, it's impediments. Well, sure. Impediment, something that, again, we're escalating. The Scrum Master is trying to help resolve for the team. But we have a lot of other things. Maybe we're not, iteration or sprint planning. Maybe we're not doing a very good job with that. Estimating strategy. Are we sizing the work? Are we using any type of a measure like velocity? Do we have a visual representation of our workflow that everybody can see, right? A Kanban board. Do team members understand the focus on finishing, right? I mean, if I'm a team member and I've got development skills, so I'm a developer, and I complete work, do I go to the sprint backlog and pull the next story into action, or do I check with my team members to see if there's already something in process that I could potentially help complete so that that thing isn't carried over? Team norms, team working agreements, definition of ready and definition of done. Now, Scrum's got content on having, clearly defining what done is. But we also want something to understand from a readiness perspective so that, again, we have high confidence, we pull work into our workflow and, through sprint planning onto our sprint backlog. We're going to be able to have a high confidence we'll get it done. Look ahead planning, reduce work in process, accumulated impact, intake work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can get both of these on the screen at the same time just to kind of show you one of the things we do. I'll shrink my Miro board down a little bit. And I'm going to click on intake work. All right. So what's going to happen is it's going to take me to the intake work process goal in the ongoing phase. And it's going to take me to consider new work, intake work, consider new work. It's like, do we articulate very well, or are we capturing data that's saying, look, we're only doing it for future iterations? Like pushed work, right? Unplanned work is one of the things that we see teams struggle with, because they've planned to do a certain quantity, even if they got a little buffer, right? From a little buffer from a capacity perspective. But we might have managers, stakeholders, other teams, a multitude of sources of pushed work, right? And so we've got something that we can articulate, we can point to, and that's one of the things that we're using the DA knowledge base to do. The last thing that I'll show is, so we also like to use an improvement backlog. This can be called an adoption backlog. So if we were going to do something like intake work, actually, let me just duplicate that just so I know it's up front. Right, and what we would start doing is, and it's an improvement opportunity, shrink it down and make it the right size, which can be in our improvement backlog, right? A lot of times we'll start with a lot of the things that we're seeing over here. Right, I could just, uncover some more of these things, right? Obviously, there's lots of things within Disciplined Agile that affords being able to have improvements. Okay, so that's just one of the ways that a Scrum team that is not going to abandon using Scrum, right? Not going to move away from what we find in Scrum theory, but can look to additional practices to solve the things that are causing them to not be as efficient, or the things that are very frustrating, or how we can capture some information to say, these are the things that we need to see reduced or eliminated because they're very detrimental to us being able to get done the work that everybody has told us that we're supposed to be doing. Again, what's in scope for our project and so forth. All right. So with that, let me stop sharing my screen, and in the few remaining, we've got a few minutes. I do have a stop in just 5 minutes, so I apologize that I won't have a lot of time for Q&A. But yeah, any questions that anyone has?
So guys, really, no questions.
No questions.
So thank you, Joshua. I think we will collect just some questions. Maybe something comes in the chat. We'll look at that. If not, we have some questions, of course, prepared, so don't worry. Thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for sharing. I'm truly inspired and grateful also for your tips. I really like this mapping, the options with correct action attitudes in Scrum, and this nice slide at the toolbox for, how was it? Legacy tech stack and new tech stack. It was awesome. Thanks for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice preparation. Joshua, maybe I will start with one question. Mm-hmm. So what do you think are the weakest elements of Scrum or teams working in Scrum that are worth improving with the tools?
Yeah, I think the most significant challenge that using the DA knowledge base can help teams with is that there are, unfortunately, a lot of lower experienced, and I'll say also a little bit lower skilled Scrum Masters that are there as their coach to help them. And they don't always know, like if you're talking about, well, okay, I'm a tester, we're moving from this traditional or hybrid approach, and now we need to be able to conduct testing, right? Identify test cases, create test scripts, do whatever level of automation, create test data in this tiny little time frame, this little 2-week time box. Like, what does that mean for us, right? How do we approach that? Well, there's an entire process goal for identifying test strategy. Oftentimes, Scrum Masters aren't going to know a lot of what's in there. And I'm not saying all of them. I mean, there are plenty of very skilled, very professional Scrum Masters. But there are also the other end of the spectrum. There's a lot of them that are not. And this is an opportunity for team members to have somewhere to go. The other thing I will say is the team that I was kind of showing as an example, right? This was some real content. I had the Scrum Master reach out to me on LinkedIn afterwards and said, you just provided me like a wealth. And this was, again, it was somebody that wasn't they were a team member as well. A wealth of information for me to start going through, like all of the things I started to expose as far as some of the common challenges, because a lot of those challenges, we went through them from an assessment standpoint, they had them. So they now know where to go to look for some of what could they do.
Hey, thank you very much. So yeah, I don't know, or I may, because we have not so much time. Maybe in the meantime, our participants would like to show their faces, and we will just do a nice picture together. And in the meantime, Anya, you say us when we will be ready, okay, to have this picture. But in the meantime, maybe one additional tricky question, Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
Could you give an example of when the team itself abandoned the DA approach because it was form over a substance? In other words, when should DA not be used?
Yeah, so I would say I haven't experienced as much of that. Most of the time, the work that we do, organizations bring us in because of our experience with DA. However, we have had some times where people have been very excited. Maybe they went through something like a DASM certification course. Maybe they've attended some webinars like this and be like, this is what we have to do. And we have to abandon everything and go to DA. And that is not the intent, right? I mean, this is something that is, again, it's a knowledge base. It's a collection of practices and techniques. You do not have to stop doing what you're doing unless, again, you have a desire to move away from that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we could have a nice discussion also maybe later. I know today you don't have as much time as we thought. It's fine, everything is fine, guys. So if you will have any additional questions, just write to us. I think we can do it, or just Joshua, if you will have the time in the future, maybe you can just also answer them. We'll post, or you can post the answers. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be very happy to do that.
Awesome. So, guys, it will be really the last chance to have some picture together with Joshua. So, Anya.
Yeah, make smile, please. Okay, so last 5 seconds and I'll start shooting.
5, 4, 3, 2, and the new year? No, not yet.
Okay,
Ready?
so one last
chance.
Okay. I think we have it. So thank you.
Great.
Okay, so I think we just need to switch. So guys, please stay in the call in some minutes, because we have also some informative, some informations to you. Joshua, I know your time is highly limited, so maybe I just say our sincere gratitude goes to you for your really outstanding presentation. I think your expertise has left a lasting impact, and we are fortunate to have you here with us today.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure being here.
Thank you, and have a nice day, and let's stay in touch. I think we'll come with some nice questions. And now, Agnieszka, the stage is yours.
Yeah, sure. So just as a reminder, everyone who would like to receive the PDU points, please make sure that you change your nickname on the Zoom to your real name and the surname or the ticket number, so that we could just validate it and provide you with the PDU points. So here you can also, on this slide, I hope you can see my screen. You can also see the PDU claim code, and yeah, just please you can make a good use of it.
And also, I think Anya will post this PDU points in the chat.
Yeah, just 15 seconds ago, so you already can check it on chat.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah, so if you would like to receive the certificates, yeah, you can just send a request to the email that was provided in the chat.
Okay, so guys, we appreciate your presence in today's webinar. Thank you for being a part of this knowledge sharing journey, and thank you for your enthusiasm in learning and growing together. Thank you also for your valuable time. If you will have any questions, just share with us. We will be happy to answer them or just share them with our guest speaker and come back to you with all of the questions. I think your presence made a difference every time if you are with us in such a meetings. A short survey will also appear on your screen. So thank you for providing feedback about today's meeting. I will just now share with you. I hope you see that. And if someone would like, just stay and have some nice talk after the webinar without recording, maybe some mastermind about Disciplined Agile, just guys, stay in call. We have time for you. So it will be extremely nice if you will stay. Maybe there are some open points about the sessions. We will love to answer them. Thank you. Okay, so I think we are through the webinars today. Thank you very much, Agnieszka. Thank you, Anya. Thank you, Łukasz, for preparations. Thank you, Martina. Martina, you are not able to be with us today, but greetings to you. And I think we can just close the official part of the meeting.